We'll just get started with housekeeping stuff, and then as people jump on, they can join in. But thank you so much for joining us for our September webinar, Charging Smart webinar on shared mobility. This is a topic that's near and dear to many of our hearts, so we're really excited to have you here today and to be talking about this. A brief overview is, as always, we'll do like a brief icebreaker in the chat. So get ready to be typing and answer our icebreaker question. And then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Mackenzie Love, for a brief overview of shared mobility and how it relates to the Charging Smart program. And then we are really honored here to have our colleague, Aaron Westling, on. He's a shared mobility program manager here at GPI to give wonderful presentation about shared mobility and what you can be doing in your communities, followed by there'll be time for Q&A after his presentation. So as you're going through the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat and we'll make sure and get them answered. And then to wrap it up, we'll have some program reminders and then we'll let you get on with your Monday. So without further ado, here's our welcome, our icebreaker. As a reminder, it's really helpful for people on the chat and for us to be able to see the city that you're representing and the state that you're from. So if you haven't already, change your Zoom name to include that information. To do that, if you kind of move your mouse, if you see your square on Zoom, you can move your mouse into the upper right-hand corner, and there's like an icon that will show up that has 3 dots. And if you click on that, then the option to rename will pop up. And then as you're working on that, or if you've already done that, you can feel free to answer our icebreaker in chat. We kind of have a 2-part question here. The first is if you want to just briefly describe how your community is thinking about shared mobility options. And then kind of the more fun icebreaker question is, what is your favorite accessory when you're biking or scooting around? I was thinking about this and I was like, what is mine? And I think mine is a water bottle. I'm always thirsty, always good to be hydrated. So, but is that I guess maybe the accessory would be my water bottle holder. I don't know. So I think that would be my answer to this. So I'll give you a moment or two to put your responses into the chat. It seems like someone has a new rear view mirror on the bike. That's cool. I'm wondering now if it's like, because I've seen some that come out from the helmet that's like a little rear view mirror, or if it's like a handle rear view mirror on the handlebar. Thank you, Kurt. It's a good accessory. A front basket because it's cute. Oh, yes, love that. And oh, a phone holder. I like that. Then you can be having, like, if you're biking around and need instructions, you can have your instructions on right there. I love that. That's cool. Great. Well, keep those answers coming. We love to see them, and maybe it'll give some people some ideas on the cool accessories that they should be having on your bike or your scooter. So with that, I will pass it over to Mackenzie. Mackenzie, I'm interested to hear about how shared mobility relates to our Charging Smart program.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that. And good morning, everyone. I just wanted to thank you all for being here as well. My name is Mackenzie Love. I'm a senior program manager and transportation planner at the Great Plains Institute, working on the Charging Smart program. So I'm always thrilled to see you all, and especially today with this exciting topic. So let's dive in a little bit. What is shared mobility? It can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, and sometimes it depends on the context in which you work. But some modes of transportation that are often considered in this umbrella include things like public transit fleets, school buses, bike share, and shared mobility. And shared mobility can often refer to scooters, but there are other options as well. And it just depends on your specific situation. And there are many more options of transportation that can be shared either concurrently, or the devices themselves can be shared by multiple people by storing them in the public areas, like with those bike shares and scooter share programs. You'll see a list on the right-hand side of your screen, but there are more than that. But we just wanted to give you some illustrative examples. Um, and in the terms of charging smart program, what we're really talking about is, can you electrify any of those modes? For example, there are electrified car share options in Minnesota where you can rent an electric vehicle for a short period of time and then return it back to, say, a parallel spot on the street and leave it ready for other people to pick up. So that's the primary focus of how shared mobility relates to charging smart. But I wanted to note that there's also one other facet of this. If you have a standard version of one of these shared modes, for example, a standard bike share system that includes all human-powered vehicles, that can still support other electrified options like electric transit by making the first or last mile connections to those transit stops. So a bike share system can support electric transit and really help advance the overarching goals of charging smart. And hopefully that aligns well with the needs and desires of the people in your community. And we want to make sure that any resources that we provide through this program can support you in any and all ways that shared mobility makes sense for your community. So we're hoping to encourage and support local governments like yours as you collaborate with agencies and operators to make some of these programs a reality or to explore the feasibility of them. We do recognize that not everyone has the same ways of engaging with these services. For example, some cities do own their own bike share programs, but others, in other situations, it's owned by a third party, um, maybe a company or a nonprofit that would operate those systems. And so the Charging Smart program does have some support that can be flexible enough to adapt to any of those arrangements. Rebecca, if you could take us to the next slide, please. Wanted to note that there are not specific requirements in the Charging Smart program to earn points in the shared mobility category for any designation level, bronze, silver, or gold. That's partially because charging shared mobility rather can be complex, but mostly because of the different arrangements that communities have with those shared mobility providers that I alluded to just a moment ago. For example, some communities do own their own school buses and integrate their local governance with their school boards, and others do not. It's a completely separate entity. So we wanted to be respectful of those different arrangements. That said, shared mobility is really important. So we do want to retain kind of an entire category of actions and corresponding resources because shared mobility can highlights the interrelatedness of all transportation options and how they really work together to provide mobility in a way that suits every member of your community. And they can also be a great way to encourage equity in your transportation system by providing accessible modes, maybe for folks who have mobility limitations and can't drive a personal vehicle, or perhaps don't have the income to be able to afford a personal vehicle. It's great to have things like transit, bike share, shared cars that folks can access regardless of their specific financial situations or physical needs. So these situations, and shared mobility is a great way to do that. If you want to, I also should say, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that any action in the shared mobility category is eligible for general points. So although there's not a specific requirement to complete these actions, you can still use them to achieve your overall general points needs for each level of designation. And they are eligible for the EVs for all points, which we'll cover a little bit more on the next slide. So you can use them to advance through the program. If you want to get started with shared mobility, some foundational actions in the Charging Smart program include things like action S2.1, and I know that's a little bit in the weeds, but you can see it in the Charging Smart framework. And if you'd like more detail, please have a one-on-one meeting with us. We're very happy to talk about it. But S2.1 is work with your school district to complete an assessment of EV school bus conversion opportunities. So again, that's doing kind of that baseline understanding of the situation, determining if an electrified bus can meet the needs of your routes and of your drivers, and then making a plan to move forward. So it can give you a really strong foundation to build action upon. And we have a similar action, S3.1, which is to complete an assessment of micromobility transportation needs. That could be done by your community itself or in partnership with other entities, whatever makes the most sense, and can address bikes, scooters, and any other mobility option that you can think of or have been presented with. So we try to keep them broad and make them work with any ownership or operation arrangements that you have for these modes. Of course, there are more actions in the Charging Smart program, but these are a great place to get started. And Rebecca, if you could take us one more slide, please. I wanted to touch on EVs for all. I did mention that shared mobility can be a great way to improve access to your transportation system and make it work for everyone. And those are exactly the intentions of the EVs for all component of Charging Smart. So every action in this category, you can earn these points, and you can earn them on a sliding scale from 5 to 20 points. 5 being an action that has good impacts and it can take effort to complete, and 20 being the 20 points representing actions that took significant effort to accomplish and also have that significant level of impact. We covered this system in depth in our Charging Smart 101 webinar, which is linked on our YouTube page and in our emails after these kinds of webinars. So I'd encourage you to go back and look at that recording if you have questions about EVs for all, or reach out to our team. But I wanted to just highlight one example quickly in terms of shared mobility specifically. If you were to do an assessment, say, of micromobility needs in your community that I mentioned on the last slide, maybe a way that you could earn 5 EVs for all points, which is a really good, which shows really good intention and impacts, is to make a statement about, as a result of your feasibility study, make a statement that you hope to explore options that can increase access for those who might have physical mobility limitations. An example of what you could do to earn 20 points when completing that same action is to incorporate devices into your system, take actions as a result of that feasibility study to perhaps incorporate electric bikes or perhaps some 3-wheeled options for folks who might need that additional stability. So you can see how you move from a statement to action would increase the number of EVs for all points that you could earn. And the same can be applied to every other action in the shared mobility category. I think that is all from me, so I'll turn it over to our in-house expert, Aaron, to let us know a little bit more about about shared mobility in general. And thank you, Aaron, for being with us today. I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Mackenzie. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. All right. Can you all see that? Excellent. Yes. Perfect. Just gonna move things around. Awesome. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for spending your Monday morning with me and us, and hopefully it's a bit more fun than digging out of your email from the weekend. But as Mackenzie and Rebecca said, my name is Aaron Westling. I am the Shared Mobility Program Manager here at the Great Plains Institute. And I started about 6 months ago. And I really think that my position, even existing, is a testament to how far shared mobility has come in the last 10 to 15 years. Traditionally, the transportation and fuel teams here at GPI has been focused on decarbonizing the transportation sector through mostly electrification and biofuels. But I think in the last year or two, it's really started to change its thinking around that third leg of the stool, which is shared mobility and active transportation, and providing folks with options to kind of meet all of their daily needs without kind of the prerequisite of owning their own car. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited kind of in the direction that shared mobility is headed, and looking forward to a good conversation. So thank you, Mackenzie, again for the overview of shared mobility. I'm going to do a little bit of level setting myself so we're all on the same page. But just generally, shared mobility services allow users to access different transportation options without having to own their personal vehicle. And one of the best things about shared mobility, I think, is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Each community can kind of take stock of what their transportation needs are, where the gaps in their transportation systems are, and kind of mold a shared mobility policy and operations network out of that. There are some subcategories of shared mobility that aren't listed here, but I really wanted to focus on kind of the big four, the way I see it, which is public transit, car sharing, micro transit, which is on-demand rides often booked via an app, and micromobility, which is usually bike share and scooter share. So to continue our level setting, I just kind of want to go through each one, the first being public transit. And public transit is really the backbone of any successful shared mobility ecosystem. I think that oftentimes when shared mobility is talked about, it really goes directly to the new technology, the new shiniest toy, mobility on demand, whatever that happens to be. But without public transit, none of the other shared mobility modes would be as successful as they are. And I think the graphic at the bottom really highlights the interconnectedness between these different modes. The fact that 70% of micromobility riders reported that they use shared micromobility to connect to transit. 20% said they do that every week, and 16% of all shared micromobility trips in 2023 were for the purpose of connecting to transit. So just want to make sure whenever we're talking about shared mobility, we don't ignore the fixed route buses and trains that are essential to any good shared mobility system. Next is car sharing. There are two general categories for car sharing, one-way and round trip. Both of those names are very self-explanatory. Under the one-way car share, there are two separate types. The first being free-floating car share, where vehicles can be picked up and dropped off at any designated location within a defined operating area, rather than at fixed rental stations. Point-to-point car share, point-to-point one-way car share is where users may park at any designated location. And point-to-point is more common in electric car systems just because it helps to facilitate charging between trips. And then round trip car share is what you think of maybe when you're picking up a rental car at the airport. You're taking it from one place and returning it to the same. One example of car share that I really want to highlight is EV car share in the Twin Cities. I saw that we have a good number of Minnesota folks on the call, and I know that we're a bit biased highlighting our Twin Cities partners. But EV, I think, is one of those programs that is really on the cutting edge of what shared mobility can be. And I think that really starts with that first bullet, publicly owned by Minneapolis and St. Paul. If you talk to anyone who has lived in the Twin Cities for the last decade or two, they may wax poetically about Car2Go, which was a car share service that existed in the region about a decade ago. It was a for-profit company that was really enjoyed by the user base. It was very popular, but since it was a for-profit company, once the economics got a little shaky in the region, they pretty much packed up and pulled out overnight, which left a pretty big gap in a lot of people's transportation plans. So that's kind of where EV has come out of, and its parent company, Our Car, being publicly owned by Minneapolis and St. Paul, allows the motive to really be about providing an accessible and affordable service to everyone in the region, and being focused on that rather than turning a profit. So EV is all electric, one-way free-floating car share with over 170 shared vehicles and dedicated on-street parking spots. Another cool part of EV is that each on-street spot has 4 outlets. 2 are reserved for EV vehicles, and 2 are available for anyone who wants to charge their personal electric vehicle. And users can pay for rides via the app or their transit card. Next, I want to talk a little bit about microtransit. So microtransit, when it comes to your mind, you may be thinking about the old school dial-a-ride service, and this is kind of just the evolution of that type of program. So microtransit is really just a technology-enabled service. It uses multi-passenger vehicles to provide on-demand services with dynamically generated routing in designated service areas. And some of the main uses for microtransit are first and last mile connections to transit, transportation in areas with low population density and transit ridership, which I'll give a few examples of here in a moment. And then similar to past dial-a-ride services, non-emergency medical transportation, paratransit, and commutes to employment hubs. So as I mentioned, microtransit is really popular in more rural and less densely populated areas that may not be able to sustain a traditional fixed route public transit service. So one of those examples is called Carts Now. It is run by the Capital Area Rural Transportation System, which provides regional transportation for a large swath of area just outside of Austin, Texas. Carts Now doesn't currently serve the entire area, but is continually expanding year after year. Fares can be paid with the cash or in the app. Riders get curb-to-curb service within the service area that includes many traditional intercity transit routes. So while there may not be great day-to-day transit in the area, they still do have routes for longer distance trips. So Carts Now is a great way to access those stations, great way to access the grocery store, to get to doctor's appointments, things like that. And then again, being run by a public service, it's incredibly affordable and accessible. So rides are $2 each way. Rides are free for veterans to get to their medical trips and are discounted to half rates for seniors and persons with disabilities. So just another great service that is really vital, especially in those less densely populated areas. And then I wanted to give one more example of a successful microtransit program, one that I think is just one of the coolest programs out there, called Green Raiteros. It was started in 2018 in the Central Valley of California, based in Huron. And it was really launched as a way to get migrant farm workers to doctor's appointments. A lot of the workers did not own personal vehicles. A lot of their doctor's appointments were in towns that were 50, 80, 100 miles away. There was no way for them to access those appointments by traditional transit. And without owning a car, some of them just had to forego appointments altogether. But Green Raiteros was a program formed in 2018. It was really spearheaded by Ray Leon, second from the left there in the picture, who is the mayor of Huron, California, and has really grown since then. They have volunteer and paid drivers to help farm workers get to grocery stores, doctor's appointments, all of their needs that they might not have trouble, or that they might have trouble accessing. And it's really just a great example of a community-run, a community-oriented program, and the way it's continued to grow and use grant opportunities to build a really high-level organization is just really impressive, and always a system that I like to highlight. And then finally is micromobility, which we'll be talking a lot about during today's presentation. The two most popular services being bike share and electric scooters. And again, going back to that one-size-fits-all approach, one-size-does-not-fit-all approach, bike share, there's so many different ways you can do it. There's docked bikes, dockless bikes, public ownership models, private ownership models, electric bikes, traditional bikes, and then the electric scooters tend to be run by for-profit companies, but are continuing to dabble into more public-private partnerships. And then I also wanted to start your Monday off with a picture of my nephew sitting in a bike share basket in Milwaukee when I used to work at the Bubbler Bike Share in the city, and he is thoroughly enjoying his first shared mobility trip. So now that we've kind of level set, talked a little bit about what shared mobility is, I wanted to highlight why I think, and so many other people think, that shared mobility is such an important service. The first being emissions reduction. As I'm sure that most people on this call know, that the transportation sector is the largest contributor of GHG emissions in the United States. And while electrification is absolutely vital, and obviously this program is a testament to that, electrification isn't going to be enough on its own for us to reach our climate goals. So one example, the city of Minneapolis has found that even with the mass adoption of electric cars, they will need a 38% reduction in vehicle miles traveled to reach its goal of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. And conveniently, according to the North American Bike and Scooter Share Association, 37% of shared micromobility trips replace a car trip. So this is just an example that to reach the emissions reduction goals that a lot of cities and states are codifying into law, electrification is not going to be enough, and that we are going to have to provide more accessible and affordable ways for folks to get around. Other benefits are just the fact that owning a personal vehicle is wildly expensive. The average American allocates 20% of their monthly income to vehicle costs. Almost 17% of respondents in a 2024 survey say they got a second job specifically to afford their car. The cost of auto insurance alone has risen 26% in the last year. Last year, auto loans took over student loans as the second highest source of household debt. And auto loan defaults have hit a 15-year high. So I really just tried to jam as many scare tactics as possible into this slide, really just to highlight the fact that car ownership is incredibly expensive. And the more that we as a society require folks to own their own car to meet their daily needs, the more difficult it's going to be for a lot of folks. A few other benefits I wanted to highlight quickly: increased physical activity from shared mobility. North Americans gained almost 24 million hours of additional physical activity last year due to shared mobility, and then economic impact. An updated study of 98 US cities found that the introduction of e-scooters in a city significantly impacted the amount of money spent at restaurants, totaling an incremental increase of over $97 million in North America in 2023. So as I mentioned, I think that folks in this room are going to be pretty familiar with the EV charging that comes with things like car share. So I really wanted to focus our conversation more on micromobility today. So here is just a map of existing micromobility systems in North America, where at least 421 cities had a scooter share or bike share or both in 2023. You can see that every state is represented on this map, and almost every major metropolitan area in the country is represented. 36% of those systems were scooters only, 37% were bike share only, and 27% had both. With systems that did have bike share, 62% of those systems included e-bikes, with 38% including only traditional pedal bikes. And then when it comes to dockless bike share, which may be a little counterintuitive based on things that we've heard and seen, 55% and the majority of stations are still docked as opposed to the dockless systems. So now that we've talked a bit about micromobility, I want to talk just kind of the new wave of electrifying micromobility and some of the benefits of that transition that we've started to see. So reduced physical effort. The electric assist helps riders tackle hills and longer distances with less effort. An increased user base. The introduction of e-bikes to bike share systems has allowed it to cater to various fitness levels, enabling older adults, people with disabilities, or those who are new to cycling to participate more easily. I live just outside of a pretty packed bike path in Madison, Wisconsin. And I can't tell you how many older folks that I've seen on the path compared to just a few years ago based on their ability to access e-bikes now. And it's been really great to see. Other benefits are comfortable commutes. E-bikes can be a more attractive option for commuting as they allow riders to arrive less sweaty and fatigued. And then the potential for additional vehicle types. E-bikes really allow for other modes to be more feasible, such as cargo bikes and adaptive trikes and things like that, that once again are going to increase the user base and allow more folks to participate in the shared mobility world, which, as we talk about this becoming more of a public transit service as opposed to kind of a for-profit service, that's going to become more and more important. So now I'd like to just dive into kind of the state of micromobility charging. There are currently two main ways that micromobility operators charge vehicles. The first being swappable batteries, either by utilizing charging cabinets on site at the station or warehouse charging, and then electrifying charging stations themselves. So the first is swappable batteries. This is probably the most common way that e-bikes are introduced to micromobility systems today. And one of the ways systems are able to do that is through charging cabinets, which you can see on the left here, which allows batteries to be stored, charged, and swapped on location. This allows either users or operations team members to swap in new batteries and reduces the need to transport heavy batteries, reducing operations costs. The other way to introduce swappable batteries into a system is simply by warehouse charging, which involves operations team members traveling around the entire system and swapping in new batteries, removing the used batteries from bikes and taking those batteries back to a warehouse offsite to be charged and then replaced again. But the new wave and kind of where shared mobility electrification is heading is electrifying charging stations themselves. So this technology is relatively new, really launching in the US only a couple of years ago. Stations themselves are connected directly to the grid or use solar power. But obviously the biggest hurdle when it comes to electrifying bike share stations themselves is the cost. Connecting to the grid directly can be very expensive, but cities have found workarounds, such as connecting to existing streetlights to reduce costs. And then if you take anything away from this entire presentation, this third from the bottom bullet might be it. Stations that have, or systems that have electrified stations have found that electrifying as few as 15% of stations can keep as much as 80% of a bike share fleet charged. So it's not that you have to have, if you have 100 stations, you don't have to electrify all 100 of those stations. But if you can electrify 15 to 20 of those stations, you're going to see a boon in operations cost reduction. And you're going to see that 80% to 90% of a fleet is going to be able to remain charged just by having that small number of stations connected to the grid or connected to solar power. So benefits of this are reduce operations costs and emissions. And then one large hurdle that I'm sure many of you are thinking about is the fact that it does require cooperation with local municipalities, potentially the local utility, potentially private landowners. It just throws a few more wrinkles into that conversation. And then I wanted to specifically highlight the operational cost benefits of electric stations, as I just mentioned. But this is comparing using swappable batteries and rebalancing the e-bikes to specifically electrified charging stations. So with 0% electrification, those operation costs run at around 29%. But then after 20% electrification of charging stations, that number reduces down to 2.5%. So it really is a financial boon for any operators who are able to electrify their stations. So thinking about the funding opportunities for this and incorporating shared mobility into other EV charging projects, you might not be shocked by the graphic on the right that in 2023, there was $7.5 billion allocated by the federal government to EV charging and $0 US allocated explicitly for shared micromobility charging. But that $7.5 billion still presents a lot of opportunities to incorporate shared mobility charging into other EV projects. So federal EV funding present an opportunity to build grid connection points for current and future shared micromobility charging stations, which can be co-located and installed at the same time as the EV chargers. And this is really just because the site preparation work and trenching work is so expensive and is really unlikely to be done for shared mobility alone. I can't imagine there are too many municipalities out there who are going to spend $100,000 to directly connect one bike share station to the grid. But if you're already doing that site preparation work and trenching for new EV chargers, ensuring that there are micromobility connections put into those projects can be a great way to reduce those costs significantly. And then finally, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the future of shared mobility charging may look like. You all have maybe seen images like this before, but just the mythical mobility hub, where you're able to plan your charging and infrastructure in a way that supports multiple modes. You can end up with nodes of converging services at mobility hubs like this. So really the benefit of mobility hubs is it allows users to determine what service is right for them based on that day's trip. They can hop on a bus if they are headed to work. They can grab a car share car if they are going to visit family out of town, or they can hop on an e-bike if they're running an errand in the next neighborhood over. So really just this is kind of the future that a lot of shared mobility enthusiasts envision, where someone can just walk to the corner and really based on what they need to accomplish that day, choose the shared mobility service that is right for them without having to own any of the vehicles themselves. And I do want to address the elephant in the room. When you're looking at this picture or you're thinking about any of the charging of shared micromobility, you may be just thinking about land use. And like I mentioned, just the oftentimes competing priorities of private landowners and municipalities and DOTs who own land, things like that. But I will save that entire conversation for a future presentation because I'm sure we could talk about that for hours. So this was just a very quick and dirty overview of shared mobility and where shared micromobility electrification is today and where it might be heading. But overall, I really just want to say that the electrification of shared mobility creates sustainable transportation options for everyone, allowing folks to meet their daily needs without the prerequisite personal car ownership is something that I think we should all be striving towards, and I think is vital to a healthy transportation ecosystem. So thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully I know the answer. If I don't, I'm more than happy to do a bit of research and get back to you.
Great.
Great.
Thank you, Aaron. Sorry,
Oh,
Rebecca.
sorry, Mackenzie. But it looks like we have Emma has a question. So Emma, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
I do. Thanks for the presentation. So Brian and I on the call are from Bloomington, Minnesota, 90,000 people. We are a suburb. And one of the things that we have been thinking about is just the density needed to have mobility, shared mobility work across the city. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on less dense suburban environment, how to start this work generally just in this suburban climate. Any thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that shared mobility is becoming more and more popular in smaller areas too. I think it really just comes down to what your goals are. So I think the first step is just identifying what the needs of your community are and how shared mobility might be able to fill some of those gaps. So is it folks who are having trouble commuting into the cities for work? Is it folks who are doing a reverse commute and need to get out to shipping centers or job centers that aren't necessarily located in Bloomington? Or is it folks who are just trying to get around town easier? Is it folks who would benefit from shared micromobility who want to be able to access the restaurants and stores but may not want to drive there or may have trouble finding parking? Things like that. So I think the first step is really understanding what the transportation gaps in your city are. And then I would also say that I think being in Bloomington, you're in luck, being a suburb of the cities that you are, because the shared mobility work going on in Minneapolis and St. Paul and the state level at MnDOT, head up by Elliot McFadden, is really exploring these opportunities. And I think that there's really going forward going to be a lot of opportunity for regional cooperation. And ensuring that, because there's nothing worse than, using whether it's a public transit system or a shared mobility service and getting up to some arbitrary county or city line and not being able to return the car or return the bike in that area, or, you have to find some other solution to cross over into the next town. So I think that regional cooperation is going to be a big part of it. But I think kicking it off, it's really about understanding how people in your community want to use shared mobility, or at the very least what they're having trouble with right now, and then kind of taking stock of all the shared mobility options that we talked about and seeing which ones might be the best fit.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Emma.
Other questions for Aaron? Feel free to either unmute and say it or put it in the chat and we can read it out. But Aaron, I did notice that Icebreaker, one of the communities on the call, Southfield, Michigan, is looking to kind of more unique shared mobility options like EV carpooling. Do you have any additional thoughts on that or where they could get started?
Yeah, I think EV carpooling is a great idea, and I think it is one of those programs that can significantly benefit from the federal funds that are out there right now. The ability of charging stations, and then I think just when thinking, I guess the first thing that comes to my mind when you're thinking about EV carpooling and things like that is just where the car is going to be hosted. Just strategically placing them in ways that are going to allow for charging to be done essentially overnight, so that they're ready to go the next day, and then also just connecting with community partners who are going to understand maybe more on the grassroots level who would benefit the most from these opportunities. And then talking to them and talking to folks on the ground about, and I keep coming back to this, but I think before any shared mobility decisions are made or plans are done, really taking stock of where the gaps are and thinking about who can benefit the most from shared mobility. One thing that I didn't mention in my presentation, especially when it comes to micromobility, is that the two groups that tend to use micromobility the most are people who make over $100,000 and people who make under $50,000. It's really folks who are using it for recreation to get, you know, the white upper middle class yuppies who are taking the bike share down to the bars or whatever it happens to be. But then it's also really people who, as I mentioned in the slide that showed just the cost of personal car ownership, the folks who maybe they only have one car per family or they have no cars per family, but those are the people that can really benefit from things like electric carpool, especially to get to job centers, to get to transit stations. So I think taking stock of who you want these programs to be for, and then understanding where their needs are, and then basing your programs on addressing those needs, as opposed to necessarily trying to find a one-size-fits-all approach for your community, but really lay out your goals and who you're trying to serve, and then go from there.
Mackenzie, I see your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm just excited to have you here, Aaron. And I wanted to wait for other folks to ask their questions, but I have so many for you that I'm going to interject with one. So I also wanted to note on your last point, just to expand there, you mentioned the importance of taking stock of the needs of your community to make the best and most informed decisions. And that's something the Charging Smart program really supports and advocates for as well. We have a couple of criteria around the Charging Smart, around the shared mobility category about tracking program metrics. So even once you get these systems in the ground, if you don't own and operate it, working with the owner and operator to be able to collect that data can be really helpful to monitor if your system, once installed, is continuing to meet those needs and what changes might need to happen over time, because sometimes needs shift. So that was my quick addition. But then my question for you, Aaron, is on a slightly different topic. You mentioned the installing these projects maybe with vehicle chargers because of the expense of doing the trenching and the kind of work. So that is understood in terms of the infrastructure needs. But are you seeing communities need to expand their grid capacity to handle the draw of the electrified stations, or maybe those swappable battery cabinets? I'm not sure how much they draw from the grid. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I don't think it's become an issue yet, but I think it is an issue in terms of planning for the future. But I do think that communities also look at it in a way that if we are able to allow people to access electric vehicles in a shared way, as opposed to planning for each individual household 50 years from now to have their own individual electric car, that is going to be a significantly less strain on the grid overall. So I think they're thinking about it in wanting to optimize shared mobility services because, one, it allows everyone to participate in kind of the electric revolution that we're all excited about, considering how expensive electric vehicles are. And then also planning for the future in ways that will kind of lessen that strain in the future. And then just strategically placing your EV chargers in places that already have grid capacity, whether that's municipal buildings or schools, or I mean, we talked about places as there's so much funding for electric school buses. Where is your city, storing and charging electric school buses? Where is your city already charging its electric public bus fleet? So just strategically placing those too, I think, is important. And then I did want to mention, Mackenzie, I think your point about data collection is really important. And I also just want to add that it's really, really important that if you're working with a private partner and you are, whether it's a new ordinance or it is a new contract that you're entering with these partners, to be very upfront and clear about what your data collection and sharing expectations are from the beginning, and have that in writing, so you're not trying to come back to Lyft or Lime or whoever it happens to be 2 years down the road and they're like, no, we're not going to give you that. So you just want to have that in writing up front and set the expectation that you're going to be collecting and using that data to ensure that the system is serving the folks that you want from the beginning.
Thank you, Aaron. And that actually brings me to one follow-up question, and I'll leave it to our attendees. But we mentioned, the difference in who's owning and operating these systems, and it varies by mode and by context and a million other factors, which also goes to that there's different ways to fund having these systems operate in your locality. Do you know of any funding opportunities? I know you mentioned the overall federal bills like IRA and bill itself, but are there any specific grants that you'd recommend folks looking for, or maybe any sources that they should subscribe to get information about funding opportunities? And the last piece of that is, are there any unique funding arrangements, maybe with like a private-public partnership that folks should consider about if they're ready for these options? How do they go about making them real?
Yeah, absolutely. So resources, two of my favorites are, there's an organization in Chicago called the Shared Use Mobility Center. They have an entire learning module on their website where it takes you through all of these different modes. It talks about funding opportunities. It talks about operations. It talks about installation. Mackenzie, I don't know if you want to give that a quick Google and throw it in the chat. But the Shared Use Mobility Center learning module is a great tool. They also have a great newsletter that keeps you up to date. And then people who I cited throughout this presentation is the North American Bike and Scooter Share Association. They are dedicated to specifically micromobility, but they're wonderful people to know, and they've worked with communities throughout the country to help launch different programs. Thinking about different partnership models, there are a lot of creative systems out there. I know one of the most popular ones is having a nonprofit entity actually run the system. I used to work at Bubbler Bikes in Milwaukee, as I mentioned during my presentation, and that is grant funded. The city funds part of it as well. And then it is run by a third-party nonprofit, which has been a great system for Milwaukee. And a lot of other systems are obviously fully privately run. There are a few large companies that have kind of taken over. And then just thinking about funding sources, I think that there's a lot of creative ways to fund shared mobility. CMAQ funds are a great way. There are a lot of programs, your state regional solicitation projects that come up for funding. Any air quality federal funds oftentimes can be used for shared mobility. Any emissions reductions funds can oftentimes be used for shared mobility. So as I mentioned in the slide, there's very little direct shared mobility money allocated by the federal government, but there is a lot of federal money that can be used for shared mobility. And I think any of the funding sources that you're looking into for the Charging Smart program, including NEVI, people have used NEVI funds to ensure that they're making micromobility connections to the projects that they're installing with the NEVI funds. And this is something the federal government is becoming more and more interested in as well, especially the folks dispersing the money, maybe not the people allocating the money, but the folks dispersing the money, whether it's the FTA, FHWA, they are more and more encouraging shared mobility uses with the money that they're giving out. So I think that anything you're using for emissions reduction, for active transportation, for pedestrian safety, a lot of these funds can be creatively used for shared mobility projects.
Great, thank you. Well, and Aaron, I think if people have questions beyond today's webinar, they can feel free to email us and we can pass them on to you so that we can get those questions answered. But thank you so much for being here today and sharing your expertise. I learned a lot myself, and so we just appreciate your time. We do have a couple program reminders and such before we get to the top of the hour here. So I do want to remind you that if you haven't completed a self-assessment yet, or met or turned in a commitment letter for the Charging Smart program, please go ahead and do that. And then once we have those items from you, we can have a one-on-one individual goal setting meeting with you all. And so if you've turned in the self-assessment, if you turned in your commitment letter but haven't had that one-on-one meeting with us yet, we'll send out a link to schedule that meeting with us. Or if you had a one-on-one meeting with us, but it was a while ago and you'd like to meet again, we'd love to do that as well. So please feel free to, with that link, I believe it'll be your availability so that we can compare our schedules. So please fill that out. And then as always, if you have any questions for us about anything that you're working on, need extra support, or, just anything that's going on related to the work that you're doing, with transportation electrification, please reach out to our team and we'll provide that support to you in whatever way that you need. So don't be shy, reach out. We're here to help you and support you. And then last but definitely not least, we'll be sending out this recording and the slide deck and any links that we shared during this webinar to you all, hopefully within the next week or so. Once we get this recording onto YouTube, that's kind of our limiting factor. But in the meantime, we do want to remind you that we do have some great resources out there for you. We have the Charging Smart website where we host all of these webinars and links to the slide decks, and where we have all these links that we've talked about today on one nice spot for you to look at. And then, Aaron, we anticipated some of the other outside resources that you might be mentioning. So we do have them linked here, that Shared Use Mobility Center that Aaron mentioned, and we did throw that link in the chat, as well as the North American Bike Share and Scooter Share Association link. So those will all be available to you via the follow-up email as well. So they're great resources, and I would highly encourage you to take a look at them if you haven't already. So without further ado, thank you so much for being here today and listening to all this great information about shared mobility. And once again, just a big thank you to Aaron for your time and all the great information that you shared. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your Monday and a great week.
Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Aaron. And I have your slides, so I'll add them to this and send them out. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Hope it hit the notes. Wasn't entirely sure, but
yeah, Aaron, I thought that was super, super helpful. Always nice to have that kind of background information, and then state of the union, state of the field, and then the new charging options, what's coming next. So I thought it was wonderful.
great. Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. Yeah, if anyone reaches out or you want a shared mobility talk, let me know.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Nice to have you.
Have a good week, guys.
Bye, all.
Bye.